to have the ability to be in balance that way in relationship. For it to work well, you have to be in active self-care and be available for interdependence, both in the taking and the giving. And you got to be moderate. One of the things I noticed in immature relationships, which again are human relationships, one of the things I noticed is that in an especially immature toxic relationship, there are huge intensity issues. In fact, intensity kind of defines the relationship. One of the unfortunate things about that is that oftentimes people, unfortunately, coming out of that experience, don't believe anything's happening unless there is intensity, and they seek to create it, when really, in relationships that are functional or mature, whatever you want to call that, I'm having a hard time labeling it, human and loving, there isn't a lot of intensity except where it's appropriate. And that would be when the circumstances call for some passionate activity, which can be sexual, or it can be a real important intellectual conversation. Or maybe at some point, maybe somebody's having some intense emotions. Like, I was going through a grief reaction to some things in my life recently, and so I had a lot of intense grief emotions, mainly pain and some shame. And Pat was available to hear that, and it was rather intense. And he was very helpful to me, offered a lot of physical support and an ear to listen, so that made it fairly intense. But I think in functional relationships, intensity isn't sought for intensity's sake. And when there is intensity, there are no victims. It's just about being human. So when I'm thinking about healthy relationships, I kind of do my thinking around the 5 core symptoms of codependence. Going down the secondary symptoms, what you'll see is people in healthy relationships don't engage in negative control or manipulation. They don't stand there and tell others how they have to be. And they don't manipulate others into who they want them to be. They let them be who they are a good deal of the time. It's not possible to do that all the time, because as human beings, of course, we're going to not be able to do that perfectly. You'll also see in relationships, I think, that are healthy, a lack of resentments, mainly because people are taking care of themselves and not making their partner responsible for their issues of self-care. And they use good boundaries. And don't mistake normal behavior for victimization. You know, when you've been injured early in life and have a lot of victim issues and have a lot of unfair experiences, whenever things seem to be unfair to you as an adult, you'll often think you're being victimized, when a lot of the times you're not being victimized, it's just what's happening. So you see, in mature relationships, both partners don't misinterpret victimization and develop resentments, and they stay out of offending each other, so there's no need to develop resentments. I think also, if a relationship is going to work well, there needs to be, at some level, absence of addictions, especially the ones that remove people from intimate exchange because they medicate reality so intensely. And those would be the big ones I talked about earlier on the recovery tape. And those would be chemical dependency, sex addiction, severe gambling issues, and severe eating disorders. When people are involved in those particular addiction issues, the addict is not available for intimate exchange, which is what creates the relationship. Love addiction can also be very destructive to a relationship too, and so I also include that as and avoidance. Those two are also issues of addiction that wind up being terribly destructive and creating very toxic exchange eventually, especially as the relationship ages. So I think it's important, if you want to have some sort of reasonable relationship with another person, that there's some sobriety. Now, another thing that I think is important to focus on, these are, I'm just telling you the things that I focus on so I can find my way. I focus on what Aaron Beck said in his book, Love is Never Enough. That's a very good book, by the way, if you ever want to read a good book on relationships. He's a father of cognitive therapy, and he's brilliant. The book's very intellectual, but it really gives you a lot of good information. But what he said was that there are 5 important concepts that have to be present in a relationship in our culture for the relationship to work in a reasonable way. One is there has to be commitment, because commitment brings about trust. Commitment means I'm going to be here through the thick and the thin of it. It doesn't mean I'm going to stay around and when it gets bad, I'm out of here. It means I am willing to go through this life experience with you, through the good and the bad of it. I'm committed to you, to working it out. Now, of course, I want to say something here, too. Sometimes relationships are such that it would be a very unhealthy choice not to break the commitment. For example, when somebody's beating or sexually abusing another human being, or is threatening intense violence, or even to kill them all the time and stuff like this, the person really can't stay. In fact, I think the person doing the abusing has broken the commitment, destroyed it, as a matter of fact. But commitment is a huge issue. And what do we see in our culture today? People not able to commit. They have these, let's try this relationship for a while. What do they run into? They run into the difficulty all of us have dealing with other people's issues of humanity, and then they're out of there. People are afraid to commit because they think that in that commitment they're going to have some trouble. And of course, if you're going to be in a human relationship, aren't you going to have some trouble? Of course, it's inevitable. See, having relationships or being in relationships really requires a lot of heart, a lot of courage. And they'll make you. They will be your making. The second thing Beck talked about is that you have to have the ability to be faithful. And what's happened to our culture in the last 30 years around the issue of sexual fidelity? We've kind of confused ourselves over the issue. When you're sexual with somebody, for most people, there's a very deep bonding that goes on. When somebody steps outside a committed relationship and is unfaithful, and the partner finds out, the bond is broken. And sometimes I've noticed even if the partner doesn't know, they sense a breaking of that bond. It's real funny, in my first relationship, my husband ran off with another woman. In another relationship I had, that one, I didn't run off, but that was happening, and I could tell it without knowing. I had gone through the experience once. I knew what that experience was, and I knew it without knowing. So there must be fidelity. The third thing that must go on is loyalty, and this is a tricky issue. Pat and I went around and around and around and around about this one. But loyalty is about backing your partner up when they're in conflict with somebody else. You have to have that ability. Now, a lot of people, out of their logical mind, won't do it. Because what they say is, well, if my partner's wrong, I'm going to look like a jerk backing him up, and I won't do it. But if you don't do it, what's your partner going to think about you and the relationship? They will feel betrayed. Do you think that helps the relationship? No. The experience of betrayal is devastating. And what happens is that your partner's ability to trust you, if you are not loyal, will get on very shaky ground. And trust is the other important aspect that Beck talks about. You have to be trustworthy. In other words, you have to be who you say you are, as well as loyal and faithful. And you have to have the ability to trust. If your ability to trust has been wounded in childhood trauma, then your ability to be in relationship is on shaky grounds. What actually has to happen for somebody like that is they have to go through the experience of taking risks to the point that trust forms. But anyway, your partner's ability to trust you will be based on your ability to be loyal, faithful, and be who you say you are. Now, all that is necessary. I think in terms of loyalty, you have to, if your partner's in a fight with somebody else, the best you can do is stand behind them. If you think they're wrong, I would suggest you keep it to yourself unless they ask your opinion about it. And at least stand behind them. Don't get anywhere near the other person. Let your partner work it out, and let the other person be responsible for themselves. Don't get in the middle of it. It's very devastating. It'll be devastating most of the time to the relationship. Now here's a glitch in our culture. What do you think happens when somebody's been divorced and remarried and there's his and her kids? Who are you loyal to? Your new partner or your children when your children get in honest conflict with your partner? Anybody have an answer for that? I haven't figured it out yet. It's like, do you want to hang yourself or shoot yourself? See, this divorce and remarriage and all these kids and all these half-siblings, full siblings, step-siblings, several different parents or grandparents, several different parents, several different moms, several different dads, stepmom, all this stuff, screws up the loyalty issue. Who are you going to be loyal to? Your kids aren't going to like it when you back up a new husband that they think is off the wall. They will feel betrayed. Now, if it's about your own parent, I think children know, for the most part, that parents have to stand together. And as long as no direct abuse is going on to the child, that's pretty safe ground. A child will not wind up feeling so betrayed. It's still a risky area, too. What are we talking about? What am I talking about? Now, what does it sound like to you? What I'm talking about is how very difficult the human condition can be whenever we talk about relationships. I heard some new statistics. I can't remember the name of the study recently, but the study was showing, now again, I don't trust studies because I know people can manipulate statistics. But what it was saying is that they believe children are less distressed when parents stay together than when they divorce in the long run. That was a chilling study. But having been divorced and remarried so that my children wind up having several mothers, several fathers, a whole array of siblings that are half and step and full and all this, which I want to tell you is a nightmare when we all get together. The last time one of them got married, I thought I was going to have a nervous breakdown. And it mainly because it was so embarrassing, because a lot of, it was my daughter's wedding. She had a lot of her friends there. And they all wanted to know who these people were. And she was saying, well, now that's my father's daughter by his second marriage. And this is a step aunt. And this, because I've got 2 step siblings. I got 3 steps, but anyway, that's not here now. Anyway, now that's the mother of my father's second wife, and now that's the father of my mother's second husband. I mean, it was like, everybody's like, why don't we stop talking about this and these relationships? They're very complicated, and many times my children have said to me that they do not appreciate this experience. It makes it hard for them to know who to be loyal to, who to own, who to be close to, who to take risks with. So when I read that statistics, that study, I said to myself, aha, I understand this. Of course, as Pat said, hindsight looks like it's true, but it's not, because you never know if you had stayed what would have happened. It might have been worse. But you see, that again brings up the problems in our human relationships. We don't know. I assume that that choice I made years ago to leave prevented something worse happening. But of course, what happened as a result of that certainly has created a lot of harmful consequences for all of us involved. And that was a hard decision to make. So there must be, going back over what I'm talking about, loyalty, fidelity, trust, commitment, and the last one, which is, for me, it's not as big as the others, but it's probably the harder thing to do because it's murky for me. It's a little hard to understand exactly what it is. But he says one of the things you have to be able to do is be cooperative. You have to cooperate. In other words, you have to be able to negotiate and give in to a certain extent. Out of my immaturity issues, whenever I had to give in, at first I just gave in over everything because I was so afraid of abandonment. But later on, when I started to make a stand for myself and be true to myself, then I always felt like I lost something if I gave in at all. I mean, one extreme or the other. And I had to learn that sharing power and negotiating experiences and not getting my way was an act of maturity. And I had to reframe it in my whole head so I could get along with that. So as I'm on this journey,